Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the tragic case of Patrick Boyle and the murder of Isabella Daglish, which took place in Gateshead in 1890. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. Although it is still quite rare, this is one of those occasions where the backstory of those involved has been impossible to find. The fact that Isabella was sometimes known by her maiden name made it even more difficult, so sadly the details about their previous lives will be very basic. Patrick Boyle was said to be around 34 years old at the time the crime was committed, so would have been born in around 1856, and he was born in Newcastle. His parents are unknown. He lived in Gateshead with Isabella and was said to work as a labourer. He was a known drinker, and it was said that the couple often argued. Isabella Daglish, the victim, was said to be around 35 years old at the time of her death, so would have been born in around 1855. Her place of birth and parents are unknown. She, as previously stated, lived in Gateshead with Patrick Boyle, and the couple were unmarried. Isabella was also a known drinker. She had previously been married and was a widow. Her husband had died in around 1888. It is not known if she had any children. At around 1 p.m. on June the 21st, 1890, Isabella and her neighbour Jane spent some time in Isabella and Patrick's house drinking tea. Then shortly after this, Patrick sent for some beer, and the three drank this. Then Patrick got washed and changed, ready to go out. Before he went out, he accompanied Isabella and Jane when they went to visit Isabella's brother, where they had more beer before the two women left to go and buy some groceries. They returned to Isabella's home a short time later, and Isabella sent a little girl to get them some more beer. A short time after this, Patrick returned home. He was quite the worse for drink by now, but he still sent the little girl back out for more beer. Patrick did not drink much before he decided to lie on the bed where he fell asleep. While he was asleep, Isabella went over to him and took some money out of his pocket and put it into her own pocket. When Patrick awoke, he accused Isabella of stealing his money. She said she did not have it, and Patrick then knocked her to the ground and began to kick her. Isabella got up and ran down the stairs with Patrick following. He caught her and hit her on the face, saying he would kill her if she did not give him his money back. At this point, Isabella handed him back the money she had taken. Bizarrely, at this point, Patrick then invited Isabella and Jane to go for a drink with him, and the three went to a local public house, along with two other unnamed women, where they drank some rum, and both Patrick and Isabella were by now very drunk. At around 11 p.m, Isabella was found lying on the ground near to her home. A neighbour helped her back to her room and found the door locked, so she helped Isabella to break the door open. Another neighbour heard Isabella on the stairs of her home around 11:45 p.m. She screamed and shouted, "Police! Murder!" before the sound of someone falling was heard. The neighbour did not take much notice of this, as they were used to hearing Isabella shout and scream on a regular basis. Nothing more was heard from the rooms until the early hours of the morning, when the police were sent for. And when P.C. Elliot arrived, Patrick suggested that Isabella had taken her own life, saying that she had threatened to do it before. However, P.C. Elliot noticed that Patrick appeared to be covered in blood, and that Isabella had many bruises on her face. And on asking Patrick if he had killed Isabella, he replied, saying he had beaten her for stealing his money, but he had not killed her. Patrick, however, was arrested and charged with the willful murder of Isabella Daglish. The inquest was held at the Gateshead Police Courts before Coroner Graham. John Bone said he had identified the body as being that of his sister Isabella, who had lived in Gateshead for around 2 years with Patrick Boyle. He said the couple had never been happy together, and Isabella had often complained that Patrick had ill-used her. He said he had told her to leave him many times. He added that she had twice left him and gone to Jarrow, but Patrick had gone after her and taken her back to his house. He said he had visited Isabella at her home on the afternoon of June the 21st, and at this time she had been sober and there had been no signs of bruises on her face. Jane Laidler said she lived in the same building in Church Walk in Gateshead as Patrick and Isabella. She said Isabella called at her house at around 1 p.m. on the 21st and asked her to come for some tea. When she arrived at Isabella's home, Patrick was also there. They all had some tea, and then Patrick sent for a pint of beer, and the three shared this between them. She said Patrick then washed and dressed as he planned to go out to the local public house for the afternoon. Isabella then asked Jane to accompany her to her brother's house, and she said Patrick came too. When they were there, she said the four of them shared 3 pints of beer between them. After this, she said they left and went to buy some groceries. Patrick did not come with them. They returned to Isabella's home and found it empty as Patrick had not yet returned. Isabella, Jane said, then sent a young girl for some more beer. It was shortly after this that Patrick returned, and Jane said he was the worse for drink, but he still gave Isabella some money to send for more beer, which she did. Jane said Patrick didn't drink much before lying down on the bed and falling asleep. While he was asleep, she said she saw Isabella go over to him and put her hand in his trouser pocket. She noticed that she took out 2 half-crowns and a shilling and put them in her own pocket. Patrick awoke soon after this, and almost immediately he accused Isabella of stealing his money, saying, "You have my money." And Isabella replied to him saying, "No, Paddy, I've not got your money." Jane said Patrick did not believe her. He got off the bed and went to the room door and locked it, then went to a drawer in the room and took out a razor. She said he then turned to her, Jane, and said, "I will put this into you." Jane said she told him that she would shout for a policeman. She said he did not touch her. Instead, he went to Isabella and knocked her to the ground and then began to kick her. He then attacked another lady by the name of Mary Conlon, who had also been in the room and had tried to stop him kicking Isabella. Jane said after this, Patrick unlocked the door and went outside into the passage. Mary ran to her own room and Isabella ran down the stairs. Patrick quickly followed her and hit her in the face, saying if she did not give him his money back, he would kill her. Isabella then gave him back the money she had taken from him. Jane said this seemed to calm Patrick, and he then invited the 2 women to come to the pub for a drink with him. Jane continued by saying that 2 other women joined them and they all drank some rum, though the barman had refused to serve Isabella as she was arguing with Patrick again, so Jane said she gave her her own glass of rum. They left the pub shortly before 11 p.m, and Jane saw Patrick give Isabella more money to buy some more rum. She said the couple were both very drunk. They went to their room and closed the door, and Jane went back to her own room. She did not see or hear anything else after this. Mary Conlon said she lived in the same building in Gateshead as Patrick and Isabella. She said she'd returned home from work around 7 p.m. on the 21st, and at around 8 p.m. Isabella had asked her to come to her room for a drink. She said when she was there, Patrick had accused Isabella of stealing his money. He had knocked her to the ground and kicked her several times. She tried to stop him, but he kicked out at her as well. He had locked the door so they could not get out. She said she heard someone shout the police were coming, and Patrick let them go. Isabella, she said, ran down the stairs, and she was sure she tripped and fell on the way, and this was how Patrick caught her. She said she did not see what happened after this as she went back to her own room. Later that night, she said she heard Patrick and Isabella arguing, which was very common for the couple as they always seemed to be fighting about something. Margaret McGrail said she also lived in the same building as Patrick and Isabella in Gateshead, and on the night of the 21st of June, she said she heard them outside arguing. Patrick had said he would kill Isabella if she did not give back his money. Margaret said she had spoken to Isabella and told her to give him his money back, which she had done. Patrick then took the women to the pub for a drink. She said she did not hear anything more from either of them that night. Sarah Fennick said sometime before 11 p.m. she saw Isabella lying on the floor in the passage of the building. She believed her to be in a drunken state. She said she did not go to see her, and a few moments later she heard what sounded like a door being broken open. She said she heard no more that night until the police arrived in the early hours. Catherine Conlon said she found Isabella lying on the ground near to the door of her room. Isabella said, "Is that you, Kitty?" And she said it was. Isabella then asked if she was at the door to her own room, and Catherine told her she was not. She said Isabella then asked her to help her to her own room, which she did. The door was locked, so she said Isabella pushed hard against it and it opened. Catherine said there was no one inside the room at the time, and she said she did not hear any more after this. Elizabeth McGinley said she also lived in the same building as Patrick and Isabella in Gateshead. She said at around 11:45 p.m. on the night of the 21st, she heard Isabella come out onto the stairhead beside her room. She gave a scream and shouted, "Murder! Police!" She said she then heard a noise as if she had moved closer to the stairs than the sound of someone falling. She said just after this, her own husband came up the stairs and asked what was going on. She said she told him she did not know. She took no notice of the cries for help, as she said Isabella did this all the time, and there was normally nothing wrong. It was usually just the couple arguing. P.C. Elliott said in the early hours of June the 22nd, Patrick came up to him in the street and asked him to come to his home, as he said his wife had cut her throat. He said he went with him to the home, and once inside, Patrick pointed to the body of Isabella and asked, "Do you think she is dead?" P.C. Elliott said he believed that she was. He said Patrick added, "She has threatened to do it before, but I never thought it would come to this." P.C. Elliott said he noticed that Isabella had many bruises on her face, and he asked Patrick how she had got those, and he had replied, "I gave her a good pounding last night, as she had taken the money from my pocket when I was asleep." P.C. Elliott continued by saying that Isabella had blood on her hands and that Patrick had blood on his hands, hat and coat. He said he charged Patrick with the willful murder of Isabella, and he replied saying, "I never caused her death, though I do not deny that I struck her last night." He was then taken to the police station, and he did not make any further statements. Dr. Martin said in the early hours of June the 22nd he was called to the home of Isabella Daglish, and he said he found the woman lying on the floor, and he felt that she had been dead for some time. She had a stab wound to her neck and many bruises to her face, all of which he believed had been inflicted quite recently. Dr. Martin did not say that he had performed the post-mortem on the body of Isabella, but he believed that the cause of death had been shock from the blows to the head, neck and chest, and that her injuries had not been self-inflicted. The coroner, speaking to the jury, said that there was ample evidence to suggest that this case must go before another court. There were many witnesses who had testified to Patrick ill-using Isabella, and those who had also heard him say that he would kill her, and he said the man himself had admitted to beating her on the 21st. It was for them to decide if Patrick had intended to kill Isabella that night, or if it had been an accident. The jury retired for only a short time before returning a verdict of guilty of willful murder against Patrick Boyle, and he was committed for trial. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Isabella. However, she did have family in the area, so it is to be assumed that they would have taken care of her burial. I did not find any evidence of a headstone anywhere in the area for Isabella. The trial took place in mid-July of 1890 in Durham before Mr. Justice Wills. Prior to the trial beginning, the magistrates reduced the charge to one of manslaughter. Patrick Boyle pleaded not guilty to the charge. Almost all of the evidence at the trial was the same as that given at the inquest, so I will, as always, only include any new details. Dr. Martin stated that Isabella had been beaten to death, and although it was true that Patrick had clearly struck out at her neck with a razor, she had not died from the stab wound but from the beating. He felt she had been kicked and also hit with a blunt instrument, but he did not know what this may have been. The attack, he said, had been quite vicious. I did not find any evidence of the case for the prosecution. However, it was stated again that Patrick had admitted to the attack on Isabella, and that he had been heard to say he would kill her, and that he was known to have been violent towards Isabella many times in the past. The defence spoke to the jury to suggest that Patrick had not been involved at all, and that it was in fact all self-inflicted, as Isabella had been very drunk and had fallen several times. It may have been any of these falls that had caused her death, as there was no definite proof that any of the injuries had been caused by Patrick. I did not find any details of the judge's summing up for this case. The jury retired for a short while before returning the verdict of guilty of manslaughter. The judge did not pass sentence until the next day, when he stated that some good character statements had been received, and in light of this he then sentenced Patrick to 18 months penal servitude with hard labour. Hard labour, I believe I have mentioned before, was often just pointless tasks such as moving earth from one place to another, and it was simply designed to make the prisoner's life as difficult as possible, in the hope that this would stop them from ever offending again. By 1891, Patrick was still to be found as a prisoner at Durham, and although I cannot be 100% certain, it is possible that he died in 1896 at the age of around 41. This was another very strange case. Although it seems that Isabella was not happy living with Patrick, when she had left him, she was easily persuaded to go back to him. It also seems that both were very fond of drinking, and when drunk, they both argued as much as each other. Although there was never any evidence to suggest that Isabella was violent towards Patrick. It was possible that Isabella had taken money from Patrick in the past, and when he had been drunk or incapable, she had often done this, as he was very quick to accuse her of taking it when he found his money missing on that night, and he did not think that it had been anyone else who had been in the room at the time. However, his reaction in kicking and threatening to kill Isabella was very extreme. And I cannot truly understand why after the first attack on the 21st that Isabella was happy to then go out drinking with Patrick, unless of course she was afraid to refuse for fear that he would attack her again, or that her need for more drink was stronger than her need to get away from him. Was Patrick responsible for her death? Well, it seems that had he not beaten her that day, then she would not have died. But it is also still possible that some of her injuries were caused by falls. Was the jury right to find him guilty of manslaughter, or should he have been found guilty of murder? I feel manslaughter did let him off quite lightly when you consider that he had threatened to kill her that day and seemed to see nothing wrong in beating her for simply stealing a few coppers from his pocket. But I also admit to not believing that he truly did wish to kill her. I believe it was just a threat to try and get his money back. But what do you think? Were the couple as bad as each other, and this was just something that would have inevitably happened anyway? Or was this a case of Patrick being drunk and not in control, so his beating was more violent than usual? Do you think the jury made the correct decision, or do you think he should have been found guilty of murder? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and once again I do apologise for the mistakes that I made, which I do hope I corrected as I went along, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.